You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also be sure to give us a review on iTunes. We have some great reviewers that we certainly love that put some great reviews up over the past week. You can go to iTunes and go into the reviewer section and give it 5 stars if you would, please, and tell people to like it. That helps us get more eyeballs to the show as well. You can go to the CVPN, of course, or youtube.com/Chris Voss if you want to watch the video version of this thing. And we've got most excellent author on today. We've got a lot of great authors lately that the publishing companies have been sending us. But this gentleman's written several books. I'm going to give some interesting insight. His name is David Goodwillie. He's the author of The American Subversive, a New York Times notable book of the year, and the memoir seemed like a good idea at the time. He's written for the New York Times, New York Magazine, and Newsweek, among other publications. He's also been drafted to play professional baseball, worked as a private investigator, and was an expert at Sotheby's auction house. He's a graduate of Kenyon College and lives in Brooklyn, and he's the author of the newest book, The King's Country, a novel. And this is pretty awesome. Welcome to the show, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, Chris.
I got to get the product placement here perfectly.
It's Kings County, which is actually the real name of the borough of Brooklyn.
Awesome sauce.
Nobody knows. And if you only find out when you get your jury summons for the first time, and it says Kings County Courthouse. And that's how you find out what Brooklyn's real name is.
You know, when I was reading it, I was like, there's counties in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
I was like...
Borough is a county. So, like, Manhattan is New York County. Queens is Queens County. But nobody ever knows that stuff.
Yeah, I was called Brooklyn. But I'm not from there. And you are. You live in Brooklyn.
I am in Brooklyn right this second, yeah.
So, David, give us some plugs where people can order your book on the interwebs and find out more about you.
Sure. It actually comes out tomorrow, July 28th, from Simon & Schuster, and you can find out more information on davidgoodwillie.com, and that's GOODWILLIE. I'm on Facebook, and Instagram is just @Goodwillie, my last name, and you can order it. Every author loves if you go to an independent bookshop and order it, because they're struggling right now. Only about half of them are open in the country, but some of them have curbside service. Some of them you can get in, and it depends where you live. But definitely try to order from your local bookstore if you can. Obviously, Amazon, bookshop.org, wherever you get your books.
Independent, support the independent folks, especially right now with this COVID-19 crap going on.
Absolutely.
So this is a book that's kind of a love letter to Brooklyn and New York City back in the early 2000s. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Nice. So what got you started in book writing? You've written a few books. So before we get into it, let's get into a little bit about you, if you don't mind.
Sure. I have every writer has a very different path to becoming a writer, a book writer. I didn't start writing till I was like 30 years old. I moved to New York after a very brief and unsuccessful baseball career, and had the weirdest jobs in the world. I was a private investigator for the world's largest investigative firm, which is called Kroll Associates, which does they don't follow like cheating spouses around. They follow like money around the world at a very high level and kidnap, ransom and stuff like that. Oh, wow. And I kind of wanted to find out what the underbelly of the city looked like. And that was a great way to kind of do that. I thought I was going to be a great investigative journalist and all that stuff. And then I got into the auction world at Sotheby's. I rode the .com boom up and down. But I'd moved to New York to become a writer, to be in the arts. And I just didn't know anyone in publishing. I just didn't have that entree into it. And then, of course, you get to be old enough and you figure out that writing something might actually help. So I turned 30 and decided I didn't have the confidence, nor did I really know how to write a novel. But I'd had this really weird 8 years post-college. and maybe I could write a book about early failure and about like trying and failing and finally getting to a place where you get, which is of course the book you end up with. And that was my first book called Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time. And it's like the Seinfeld of books. Like it's kind of about nothing and everything at the same time. And it's a very episodic story about becoming what you want to be, but also about the idea that not all of us should know what we're doing at age 22. And maybe we shouldn't be married at age 23 and all this stuff. And that maybe life should be figured out a little bit before we settle into these more routine parts of our adulthood. And that's what that book was. And then after that, all of a sudden I was a published author. And, for someone who wants to be literary, a novel is the kind of gold standard. And then I started writing novels after that. And this is my second novel. So it was a roundabout way to becoming an author. But also, unlike most arts, like there are no great 23-year-old writers. Like there are great 23-year-old actors and actresses. There are great 23-year-old painters, musicians, but like there needs to be a kind of a lived life situation to becoming an author. You need something to actually be able to talk about in the books.
There you go. My problem is I'm getting sold. I'm starting to forget stuff. Like
right. So you got this really meaty, there's about 10 years there where you can really get something done.
I know why Hemingway shot himself at 52 or 53. You've had an interesting career. I mean, professional baseball, being drafted for that. Private investigator. It's kind of funny. I watched Chinatown for the umpteenth time last night.
Yeah.
What a movie. And then Sotheby's Auction House. Like that whole resume right there is kind of like
yeah, it just kind of, and one thing led to another because I had this baseball kind of career. Sotheby's in the late 90s was, and Sotheby's is a very fancy auction house that sells $1 million paintings and jewelry and all that stuff. But as the internet was taking off in the late 90s, they wanted to sell everything they could. So they started selling like more interesting but lesser priced items like rock and roll memorabilia and sports memorabilia. And I kind of just knew sports stuff. Like I'd grown up collecting baseball cards. And,
oh, wow.
And understood what the value of a Babe Ruth signed baseball kind of was. And what I didn't know, I very much learned on the job. But it was, absolutely, and it's like anything in New York, you learn about society too at Sotheby's. You learn about like kind of the culture of the city and how everything works, even though it's the strangest entree, which would be sports, into that world. So it was great, but I did it for 2 years and then realized it wasn't, it was also kind of a glorified garage sale. You're selling just people's stuff again and again and again.
Garage sale.
And I'm not sure that's what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah.
Well, selling other people's crap, I suppose.
I mean, $20 million crap, but still.
Well, it's crap to them. They're obviously unloading it, right?
Yeah,
they need the cash.
Yeah, right.
They've got a Coke problem and they need the cash. I don't know.
There's all kinds of reasons people get rid of their stuff. It's cool. Well, in Sotheby's, they call it the 3 Ds: death, and divorce.
Oh, yeah, divorce. The divorce thing, yeah. Wow.
The 3 big reasons right there.
I'll do that. I can't even afford to be married.
Yes, drugs. Maybe drugs is the 4th D. Yes,
maybe drugs is the 4th D. There you go. So this, I imagine being a private investigator in New York and the scenarios you're talking about, that really gave you an interesting kind of gritty sort of, stuff to help you write this book, right?
Very much so. All my books have been very New York based, which I never mean to do, but it's the world I know. And being a private investigator allows you to allowed me, I had to get into all kinds of circumstances and neighborhoods and jobs or work I knew nothing about. And when you move to a city like New York, you very quickly find your crowd and your geographic like center, and you can kind of live here for a very long time without exploring stuff and without meeting people outside of your orbit. And doing that, I met all kinds of people. I met the richest of the rich. I met the poorest of the poor. I met the municipal New York with the courts and the downtown governmental parts of New York and City Hall, and then worked in all kinds of boroughs. And I was the kind of, Kroll Associates is what it's called. It's the largest investigative still agency in the world. It's like a private government almost. And
holy crap.
Actually, the comedian Nick Kroll is the son of the founder. Nobody really knows that.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, and they kind of operate like a big law firm where they have all these satellite offices around the world. And it's, they follow when Saddam Hussein left Kuwait. and he took all their gold. And the U.S. government didn't care. And Kuwait, once the dust literally settled, looked around and wanted their money back. They hired Kroll Associates to go do the economic tracing to find the actual gold bars, stuff like that. I wasn't working on those cases, but I worked on mob cases around downtown New York. And that stuff was absolutely fascinating. And it is the exact kind of thing, to get back to your question, that led me to become a writer. I always kind of have this 1,000-yard view of everything in my life. And,
there you go.
And I'm always interested in all of those kind of how scenarios might play out and stuff.
Awesome sauce. So let's get into the meat of Kings County, a novel. You guys can check it out on Amazon and other independent sellers. It's out today or tomorrow? Tomorrow. It's out tomorrow. You can probably pre-order it still. And it's got a lot of great praise on it in reading the back of the book and some of the other things that were online for it. So it looks like it's going to be a hot one.
I hope so. It is a love story at the end of the day about two people who move to New York and are very unlike each other and fall deeply in love. And I've always been interested in the New York origin story. What makes a person move to a city like New York from a small town or from a suburb when so many other people stay behind? It doesn't have to be New York. It could be Chicago, LA, Austin, wherever. But there's something about that person that takes that risk and moves to a city. And I've always found, and this is a gross generalization, but the most interesting people to me in a city are the ones that didn't come from that city and have this story, a knockabout story of getting to New York. And it meant that much to them. Whether they want to be in finance or in the arts, doesn't matter. It's like this, there's just some extra thing to those people. And so the two main characters, it's a woman named Audrey Benton who works for a music label in Brooklyn at the exact moment that the indie music scene is taking off in the early 2000s in Williamsburg and those neighborhoods near Manhattan. And Theo Gorski, who is a guy from a mill town in Massachusetts, whose dream it is to kind of rise above his station and break into the patrician world of books, which is still to this day quite, white and upper class, and is just now starting to diversify. But these two people fall madly in love, but of course they have pasts that trail after them. And those pasts end up being the plot of the book because they can't quite outrun them. And it comes to affect their relationship greatly. And the book is about them, but as you said, it's also about New York City and a specific time in Brooklyn between 2000 and 2010 when indie music, kind of the last gasp before hip-hop took over the world, bands like The Strokes and Interpol and Vampire Weekend, TV on the Radio. These bands were kind of all geographically based within 1 or 2 square miles of each other. And it was fascinating. I actually lived in Manhattan. I didn't live in Brooklyn at that time, but I would go over there and you could tell there was a movement happening and it was geographically based, and everyone who was into that was coming from everywhere else to that specific place. And it happens, I think, about once a decade, and you can go all the way back to the 50s in Nashville, the 60s in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, the 70s in Laurel Canyon in LA, the 80s in Detroit, the 90s in Seattle, and then on and on and on. And in the 2000s, it was Brooklyn for sure. And it's, to me, fascinating when you happen upon an American cultural moment, because they don't happen that often. And I would also posit that might be the very last one musically, because after that, music became fully digital, and it wasn't a geographic thing anymore. Everybody can make songs on their laptops right now, just like I'm talking to you through my laptop.
They are.
And so you don't need that camaraderie anymore. You don't necessarily have to be in one place. And so to me, that was fascinating to live in a city and watch that a bit from afar, but still be a part of it. And so that context is what these two characters are living amidst, is this great artistic kind of flowering. So it's that's always been fascinating to me, and the reason this book became.
I think so too. I grew up when I was young. It was always about getting to the big city, and you always, you had this romanticism, and I think a lot of people do, about moving to New York or going to LA and making it big. If you want to be an actor, actress, model, I suppose. Of course, there's great modeling in New York, or at least there used to be. I don't know if it's still what it was at one time. Seems like everyone on Instagram is a model these days. So,
They can be in their living room too now.
yeah, even I'm posting my bikini pictures.
That's right.
So, but no one wants to see that. But no, there's always this romanticism people have about moving to New York. I think I kicked it around sometime in my youth, and you know, everyone has that dream of going there and making it big, and you know, you see the real estate that you have to start out with if you first go there. I mean, you definitely have to have some money, or you're definitely going to be, you know.
The city can swallow. It looks like it can swallow you, and it can swallow you.
Yeah.
And I get asked a lot when I'm usually you go on a book tour. This year, obviously, I'm not because of circumstances. But you go on a book tour, and I'm reading in Chicago or Wichita, or wherever it is, and always somebody asks, "I want to be a writer. Do you think I should move to New York?" And the answer, I think, is quite obviously, no, you don't. You can write from anywhere, and sometimes some perspective and some space is a good thing to have. But at the same time, I found for me, and I didn't go to graduate school for writing, but I still found that being in the community, in the city where it was all happening, was a huge help. All the publishers are here, all the magazines were here, all the newspapers are here, all the agents are here. And it's still, and most industries are, a people industry. No matter how great your writing is, no matter what, it helps to meet people. It helps to like go to parties and take that risk and go up and introduce yourself to somebody and say, hey, I read your magazine. I would love to send you something. Or, you know, I read the books that you're an agent for. I think, you know, could I email you tomorrow? And that's still to this day how people get their breaks. I mean, it's the same thing for acting. It's the same thing in music. Like, you have to have the talent once the email comes through to that person. You have to have written something good, but you need that break, and then you're going to get them face to face with people as opposed to emailing them from afar.
That sounds like when I lived in LA, and like everyone would want to give you their screenplay.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I don't want to be the agent in that circumstance.
No kidding. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be either, because you're just getting pitched. But yeah, and then the name dropping, and I was on a set yesterday with Clint Eastwood, and you're like, exactly. I mean, yeah. What was the extras food table like? It's like.
And I think acting is definitely the worst, or LA is the worst for that, but it happens in every industry, and there's pretenders, and there's the people that are really talented, and they're usually the ones that can't speak up at parties because they're freaked out and sweating profusely in a corner. Like, it's, but yeah, of course that happens.
I would just always stand there, and, you know, they get around to me like, well, what did you do today on the set, Chris? And I'd be like, I don't know, I have a real job or something. I don't know. Just being funny. But no, it's really cool that you have this. And the romanticism, I mean, that's the thing that New York has always kind of had, that big city, the big lights, everything about it. There's always something that's bigger than life about New York City. Yeah. And I think, you know, like I said, I learned a couple of things. I learned that there's, you know, counties of the boroughs in Brooklyn and Manhattan. I had no idea. I was just like, I don't know, it's the island. Exactly. There's that. But, you know, I'm some, you know, backwoods from the west side of America.
But I also, as you were saying earlier, this book is a very it's very specific, and it evokes the place I'm writing about. I don't mind. I will sacrifice. I don't need to have like Da Vinci Code, plot, page turn. I want character development. I want my readers to know where the story is taking place and have them feel like they are in the story, that they know the environment that the action is taking place in. And I don't mind, and this comes with a bit of experience, I think, as a writer, I don't mind taking my time a bit to get the reader fully invested in the story, and to the point where the restaurants in the books are real restaurants. The streets are real streets. There'll be every once in a while a celebrity cameo that's like actually the person that was probably there at that moment, you know, like, and I'll make up stuff. It's fiction, of course, but that is important to me, is to get that reader to totally trust what you're writing and what you're giving them as a context and as a geographic place.
And I love how you put in the detail. Like I told you, I had to read it kind of slow because there's a lot of details there, and it paints this beautiful picture, especially at the start of the book, that made me feel kind of, what was that club in the 70s? Club 57 or?
Studio 54?
Studio 54. I was close. 3 points, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting old, man. This detail. It's all that coke we did there. No, I'm just kidding.
There certainly wasn't a lot there, yeah.
Yeah. So
their actual logo was a moon with a Coke spoon.
Yeah. There you go. So when I was reading the first chapter and getting into it, that's kind of the feel, even though it's in the 2000s.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of feeling that sort of vibe where it was that the whole club thing and the scene and everything else.
It opens up and there's a band. It opens up. A band has just had a huge performance. It's their breakout performance, and it opens up in a which is actually a real place called the Boom Boom Room at the top of the Standard Hotel in the Meatpacking District of New York City. And it opens up. The band is coming to celebrate at this huge club at midnight after their show, and there's all these people coming and going. Their manager's there, and he's all screwed up, and like the band is really this bunch of Brooklyn brothers and friends, and they don't want to be there, but they have to be. And it's this scene that I've always wanted to write, and I think is one of the hardest to write, which is a big party scene or a big scene where you're introducing 10 or 15 characters at once, but you're also kicking the plot off, and you're also trying to, there's like 5 different things you're trying to do as an author that if you can pull off, it's great. And just gives you this immense, like, kind of roaring start to the book, but is always very difficult to do because you got to keep everybody straight. You don't want the reader wondering who's this, who's that, what's going on, I don't understand. But I'd always wanted to start a book like that, and this was my big chance to do that. And so you are thrown into this club with music going, and some guy's trying to order drinks and you can't get to the bar, and like all this annoying stuff that is intensely New York-y happens in that first chapter. And then the book kind of slows down for a minute and you get to know the characters. But I wanted to just throw the reader into this kind of ridiculous New York City.
Well, the description is everything I've ever experienced at clubs, the craziness, the insanity, everything coming at you at once. You're there either chasing girls or I don't know. Well, you're always there chasing girls, but you're always there for the possibility. Just like you moved to I want to say Vegas, because there are people do move to Vegas
I feel like Vegas is the last place. Even New York doesn't really have clubs like that. Vegas still does, but it's always a weird thing because everybody's just there for the weekend, right? So,
it's always transitional.
Yeah, it's so transitional. But New York doesn't really. The club scene in New York has finally started to evaporate, I think, which is...
Is it really? So it's just becoming...
it became a thing.
It's becoming a tourist town?
It was very classist at the end because it was just, you paid money to get in. It was, $300 for a bottle of vodka. And nobody could afford it except for, guys in the finance world. And then it's called Models and Bottles. And it was just really lame. And there was like Studio 54, there might have been a big, and I was thankfully a bit too young for it, but in the late 70s, there was... The people they let in were the most interesting looking people, the ones who were dressed crazily or just, had ridiculous hairdos or just had the style or were funny. And those are the ones that got in, along with the Diana Rosses and Paul Simons and whatever the world back then. But the club scene kind of morphed into kind of tragic, comic, ridiculous anything, and lost its edge. And of course, in New York, when something loses its edge, it becomes pretty lame pretty quickly. And so cocktail bars and stuff started up after that, and just the nightlife thing moves on.
There you go. New York is a fun place to visit. I mean, it's fun. It's an interesting life, especially in the nightlife. Yeah. Like we flew in one time for JBL and Harman Kardon, and we were at some hotel and we were pretty much locked down because we were drinking every night till about 4 a.m. And there was even a nightclub scene at the hotel in the lobby. Yeah. They were just girls that
you can arrive and not even need a guide for. You just wander out and you end up somewhere that you remember for the rest of your life.
Like we're in the hotel and the girls would just come in and we're like, we don't have to leave because there's girls here. Right. And they would just come in and you're like, so where are you from? And they're like, oh, we drove out, from an hour or two away. And you're like, you drove in and you went, instead of going to a club, you went to a hotel and you're just hanging out in the lobby. And I don't know, maybe there's richer people passing through expensive hotels.
What's interesting, when I go on a book tour, it's always much more interesting to read to people that aren't from or in New York. And I'm in St. Louis or some city, and my book that makes them want to go to New York and visit New York. And that, to me, it's also nice to have people from New York be like, oh, your book's totally true to life. But it's more fun to have people kind of a bit wide-eyed being like, wow, that really made me want to go to New York. Or maybe not want to go to New York at all. But I believed that I was there with you. Whatever it is, it's some visceral response to New York, which I enjoy.
Well, there's always that romanticism about New York. I mean, between Sinatra and singing about it, and everybody, the dream of going to the big city. I mean, it's the top pinnacle of America when it comes down to it. It's where all the money is, where everything is. I tend to
write pretty contemporary stuff, but it is littered with history. There's a scene in this book where the girl is walking down 28th Street. I think it's 28th Street. And, she works in music, but she works in indie music and a very contemporary thing. But she comes across this plaque on the sidewalk, and it said, "This is the original Tin Pan Alley." And she's like, and, Tin Pan Alley, the Gershwin, the old kind of, the songbook of America. And it was in this random street where these buildings where everybody wrote these songs, and she didn't know. But she stops and looks at it, and it's just like two worlds passing each other. And I love those New York moments because they happen in real life all the time. You see an old faded image of an advertising poster from the 20s. It's still on a wall somewhere next to like graffiti that was just, it's beautiful tagging graffiti that was just put up a week ago. And it's just that's New York to me, is that history kind of living alongside the contemporary world.
And the fantasy or the romance or the, I don't know what other good word is for that, of moving to New York and going through the process, the characters in the book too, and the challenges. And, that's the thing I've always wondered. If you go there, it's a hell of a crapshoot. You don't, I mean, I've had some people that are like, I'm just going to go there and find success. And you're just like, how? And it's like, I don't know. I just go there first. And you're just like, that's jumping off the deep end, but good luck to you. And so the characters kind of go through that process where they're walking from, their background in New York and feeling their way around and stumbling and everything else.
Both of them are here for 10 years, I think, before they meet each other almost. And those 10 years, they go through almost everything that you can imagine, but they find each other. And that's kind of where the book starts. And it has flashbacks going back to their previous years before they meet each other. But then, they meet each other, and that's when the hard part almost starts, because they fall so deeply in love that, once that starts to get derailed because of the woman Audrey's past, you're like, oh my God, they went through all of this, all that stuff in New York, the joblessness, the the issues with friends, with romance, all this stuff, to find each other, and then they're gonna not make it as a couple, and that's New York for you. It throws stuff at you again and again and again, and it's luck, it's perseverance, it's your personality, it's the industry you decide to get into, it's how ambitious you are. All this stuff kind of combines to make a New York story, and of course it's such a cliche, but there's so many of them, and it's always fascinating to me. Always.
Well,
you read the history of New York, and the people from the teens and 20s and 30s are having the exact same experiences. If you read old novels that people are today, they're trying to find that first job. They're getting ripped off at apartment buildings. They're, stuck in the wrong neighborhood at 2 a.m. trying to figure out how the hell to get home. That stuff still happened back then. And it's just this great continuation, in the same way, if you're a baseball fan, that the stats from Babe Ruth's era still mean something today. It's a great continuation of a story, which I always loved.
New York City, the giant mountain, the cultural mountain or something you'd have to climb and throw yourself into. But it's an interesting journey, and it's a great book you've written here that tells the story of these guys, and the wonderful love story of life, where there's gain and then there's loss. Yeah. And we all seem to go through those cycles.
Right. And we were talking before we started the show a little bit about writing and how you get into it, what you want to write about. For me, I start very specific, almost specifically with one word that I want to write about that I haven't before. And I would consider myself like a literary author, I guess, although I like to write suspense and mystery, and there's all of that in this book. But I want to write something very different every time, too. And that's very important to me. I don't want to write the same character 10 times in a row. And this book would be about, I would say, love. And I wanted to write that love story, and it was the central tenet of it as I was writing the book over several years. The book before this was political, and it was about a couple who become kind of political radicals on the left and get in a lot of trouble. And my next book will, I think, be about money and this, how money affects people down through generations. But it's a very interesting way to decide what you're going to write about and who you're going to be and how a city influences you is to take very broad subjects and boil them down. And then, you're talking about when you kind of are quite interested in writing yourself. I don't know if you tell your listeners that, but a lot of listeners are interested in writing and want to figure out, how do I start? How do I get going? And it can be as easy as taking one word or taking an idea or taking a person you want to write about if you want to write memoir or nonfiction. And starting that way, starting very broadly, and the story kind of comes from these basic ideas, these walks I take around the city, these characters I can't get out of my head, people in real life who you're just like, they can be total people you hate or people you love, but people you can't get out of your head that you kind of need to you can release them a bit through writing. And that to me is one of the reasons I am a writer, and what keeps the job very interesting for me is every time I write a book, it's something new, and it's almost like having an entirely new job, because I do a ton of research, and you get into this world for a few years that you then are done with and you leave behind, and you hopefully have a book at the end of it, but you then start another one, and that's what keeps it interesting. That's what keeps the city fresh for me, all that stuff.
One of the things I really am disappointed about my life, I mean, I don't know why. Some people say they don't have regrets, but
I didn't mean to bring your writing into this.
No, not my. I don't have regrets about my writing because I haven't published yet, but it's just going to be a business book of all my stupid stories. I've been an entrepreneur since 18, own my own companies since 18. I wish I'd written all the books I had of employee stories, because I've had thousands of employees. I wish I could have saved all those stories, and they're starting to get lost in the 53-year-old brain. But I could have written 4 books off of just employee stories alone. It would have been like a Harvey Mackay, just endless thing. And it'll probably be a Harvey Mackay style book of all my stupid stories. But getting back to what we were talking about, I segued and now I lost track.
53 is not that old, Chris.
Oh man, dude, it's you can't drink like you used to, and I used to be able to write really beautifully. Like me and Hemingway have a thing with drinking and writing. Right. But no, it's an interesting path. So American Subversive was the political book. Yeah. And that won New York Times Notable Book of the Year. And then you did the memoir. Seemed like a good idea at the time. I'm kind of interested in that too as well, because you have such an interesting path with your resume.
Yeah, the memoir was, as we were talking about a little bit, it was about all these crazy jobs and relationships and basically a New York life in your 20s. And when you really are just trying to figure it out and trying to stay above water. And some people do, of course. Like my roommate in college wanted to be a doctor, and he became a doctor, and there was never any question what he was going to do. But I wasn't that lucky, or unlucky, depending. And I didn't have it figured out. And I'm not sure you're supposed to have it figured out when you're 22 years old. I think that people should go to college in their 20s and not in their teens. Because I'm so I became more and more interested in learning in my 20s and 30s. And I kind of wasted my college career not wanting to be in the classroom. I think people get more interested in the world later on in life, but that's another subject for another day. That book was about all of these kind of sidelines you take getting to where you want to be, and in relationships too, and with your family. You just learn stuff and gain perspective. I think in your 20s, it's such a dramatic time, and you're not wasting it, even though it seems that you're just are wasting it at the time. Women are much more just ahead of men at that time. I think that and they have things figured out a bit more, and you just feel as a dude, you just feel a bit lost sometimes, and family expectation is still such a big thing in the world, although I think that's lessening a bit. But you just, and I think the more creative people are, the more trouble they have figuring out who they want to be and what they want to do and stuff. And that book I kind of wrote to be hey, I think it's okay to not have it all figured out. I think you need a goal at the end of the day, of course, and you need to support yourself, but take the pressure off yourself a bit and live a bit of life and the world doesn't end for you at 35. Like, just, chill and like figure it out, and it's going to usually work out, I think.
There you go. That reminds me of where I got lost on my segue. The the one big regret I have in life is not really identifying that life is a collection of stories.
Of course.
And that's really what you are. You're kind of a story catcher.
Yeah.
And the fabric of stories and the fabric of life. And I never really understood that. I just always went, well, there's movies, TVs, and books, and you watch them, and I don't know, that's something to do. But it never really occurred to me until I was about 50. And I'd been writing stories because when I used to drink a lot, I used to write a lot. And most of it's just crap I posted about my opinions and whatever on Facebook and stuff. We've all seen that, or put it on this podcast if you go back a few hundred episodes. But the thing I realize is that this is really the beauty, the tapestry of life is stories and the collecting of them and the things you learn from them. And to me, that's the real fabric of life. I don't know.
I think so. I'm in real life always interested in the storytellers, the people just not necessarily full of shit, but just like the ones who are vibrant and alive, and New York's full of them. Everywhere's full of them, but New York is full of them. And those are the people I gravitate towards. Those are the people I love to hang out with. In my own work life, I love to try to tell those stories. I love to like take everything in the real world and kind of, make something coherent out of it and spit it back out in books if I can a little bit. But the problem with books is that they really have to be glued together. You have to have a narrative arc. You have to have an idea of how to tell a story succinctly, even though this book is 400 pages, but like in a kind of way that a reader is going to keep turning those pages. And that is what learning to write, I think, really means. A lot of people are good with words. A lot of people have great stories to tell, but you have to figure out how to glue it all together and how to tell it. And of course, when you sell a book, you have an editor you work with, and that helps a lot. But you have to have a feeling for that. And it's something you can learn, actually. It's something you can go to school for and learn, something you can read other books and figure out how these writers are doing it. And I think when I first realized I should maybe be a writer is because I was reading books in a different way that I watched a movie or that I went and listened to a band. I read books kind of trying to figure out what the writer was doing or why he or she was making certain choices in the narrative. Where I go to a movie and it's entertainment for me. I want to sit back and I don't really care how it got made or who the cinematographer was or what choice was, what the director's cut has that the regular movie doesn't. I don't care. And I feel the same way about music. If it's great, I just want to listen to it and lose myself in it. But books, I kind of wanted to get underneath the hood and figure out what stitched it together, what the author was trying to do, what works and what doesn't, and why it works and doesn't. And that, to me, I started thinking to myself, well, if I feel that passionately about it, maybe I should be actually trying to do it myself. And so, yeah, life is stories, very much so. But writing is figuring out how to tell that story.
And put the images in people's heads. I mean, that's the biggest challenge. You don't have it's very easy to put stuff up in video and audio format and present it because, you can see what it is.
Sure.
But when you're writing a book and a novel like yours, you have to paint the pictures in people's heads. And so you've got to be able to put them there and flesh them out, like you say, the character development and create the imagery that keeps people engaged in what was going on. And to me, that's quite a bit more bigger challenge than, a movie or a
Well, I get asked all the time why I'm not writing screenplays because they're for TV, because we're living in, quite literally the golden age of television. Like, TV is great. TV shows are smart right now. They're engaging. They're just, a lot of them are coming from books, obviously, but TV writing, I think, is the best it's ever been in my lifetime. And of course some movies, but most of the good stuff is now serialized TV. Mm-hmm. And, but it's still somebody else's thing, right? The writer is writing for the actors and for the director to then figure out. The writing is the skeleton and the actors turn it into the art. Mm-hmm. In the book, it's all the author still, right? It's all you creating that world and visualizing the world for the reader. And that difference to me is still, I also don't really know how to write screenplays or TV stuff. I haven't done much of it, but it's not quite as interesting to me as writing novels and delivering a piece of art fully formed.
What's the line from Get Shorty? You just write a bunch of shit and start out with Once Upon a Time, and then at the end you put Fade Out.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. And a lot of rewriters and rewriters along the way.
That's all you do. I always love that line that he has from Get Shorty, the movie. The book Kings County paints a beautiful layout, and especially in the beginning. I mean, you feel like you're in a club, the whole club experience, and then going through everything else. I may learn everything about New York by the time I get done, or at least the salient parts. But I've wandered New York in the middle of the night. I've been in that situation where the taxis are gone, and you're just like you're down at some whiskey bar, and you're like, how far is the hotel? We got to hike. And
the male character in the book, Theo Gorski, is a great wanderer. He's a kind of like the French used to call a flaneur, like a person who just like would rather walk to get someplace than take an Uber or a subway. And that's a very rare, it used to be everybody did it. It's a very rare thing now. But he like takes the time he's so thrilled and also mystified by the city that he wants to like experience it in full all the time, as much as he can. And he looks up at the buildings that nobody else looks. He notices the terracotta, like stuff that people don't see or don't stop to see. Like everyone I know goes place they order, as I'm sure everybody in the world does now. You get an Uber right out front of your apartment, delivers you right to the restaurant or club or wherever you're going. And you don't experience the in-between. You don't experience the city you're in or the town you're in. And I made his character that way because I wanted to bring the city back into the equation of the book. I wanted to have that visceral experience. I wanted people to slow down in the same way that writing books is a little weird in this day and age of 10-minute attention spans. Like spending 4 years on something is so foreign to people. Like I still, like I've, friends that are in their 20s who are like, why, dude? Like, wow. There's so much other stuff to do that doesn't take 4 years. Like, and I'm like, but is there really? Like, are you going to remember that stuff? Is it like, your TikTok video is going to be there forever, but I don't know. Like, is that important? I don't know. It's it can seem anachronistic to be writing novels in this day and age, but I also tend to think they're still important and that they mean a lot to the people that read them.
I think so too. I mean, the media that we've done on the Chris Voss Show, like our YouTube videos, they've been up there for like 11 years.
Yeah.
And I get emails every time someone comments on one. And I'll get emails from stuff we did in like 2012, 2011.
Yeah.
Sometimes they think those products are still current. They'll ask me for advice. Yeah. But I get like, and sometimes they just get on there to do discussions about stuff. And I'm just like, what the hell's going on in my video?
Yeah.
I'm just amazed at how much people consume media and the breadth of interest and the breadth of the thing. But yeah, I wish I'd figured out the story thing earlier. I would come home from my office every day, and owning companies, we had multiple companies, over 100 employees at any given time. And every day I come home with stories, and I'd come home with my girlfriend and be like, oh man, you can't believe what happened today. And I mean, there was just always some crazy employee story I had or some crazy business story.
Yeah.
And I would come home and I'd like have, 2 to 3 stories I'd unload on her. And then I'd be like, what happened to you? And she was the manager for a flight attendant, for flight attendants for Delta. And then she'd have to step in and fly if they called in sick and crap. So sometimes she would, in my day, just going to work, she'd been in 3 cities and, 3 different airplane rides with several hundred people that are crazy.
Yeah.
And then, she'd be hanging, she'd stay overnight in New York or Chicago or wherever. And so I'd be like, so what stories do you have? And she's like, nothing. I'm like, nothing happened to you today? Like, no, you went to 3 cities, saw, 600 people or whatever in planes and you have 0 stories? And she's like, no, nothing.
I've always thought the flight attendants, the Great Flight Attendant memoir is just sitting there waiting to be written.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many in-flight stories of absolute insanity. Like, people are not on their best behavior on airplanes. And, you really get to see a cross-section. I mean, we see it every day in viral clips now, right? Like, it's just, the stories are sitting there waiting to be told. And I'm sure there are great memoirs. I just haven't read them. But, that is
And so that made me appreciate stories. I didn't really get it at the time, and I'd been telling stories for a long time,
Yeah.
but I never really appreciated the medium of what I was doing. In fact, I sat down with my niece and nephew when they turned 18 this year, and I said, look, life is a collection of stories. Go out and think of yourself as a story collector, because you're going to learn stuff. That's why I love this show, is because I can have people on that I can learn from. I can learn their journey, the map of what they did, how they did it. And I think when I was younger, I thought that, well, there was like only certain ways to really make it in life or something. I don't know, like kind of a narcissistic sort of view. But now you learn that the fabric of life is quite expansive and multifaceted, and it's a complex journey. And sometimes at the end of life, that's really all you're going to remember. Like I'm going to be remembering all the stories, hopefully, when I'm sitting on the porch, and some of the things I learned from those stories that are.
And at the end of the day, one of my favorite episodes of yours was when you had Eddie Glaude Jr. on to talk about James Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a wonderful episode. And I, was listening to him. And of course, I'd read The Fire Next Time in school, but I hadn't really thought about it. And of course, with everything going on today, that podcast episode made me go back and pick that book up again. And so at the beginning of all these stories, at the beginning of all this, interaction is the book so often, and like, it's still there for the historical record, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And, that's what a man like James Baldwin, what he's going to be remembered by is the written word. And of course, there's some great videos of him, as we were discussing too, but like his thoughts, or his purer thoughts, are on the page. And, the world of books is to me a wonderful and complete world. It's great.
And it's so funny about how you could literally resurrect him today, and everything that he was talking about, pretty much the same sort of problems we're having. Like it's like a ghost talking from 55 years ago, going, "You're still here, you idiots." But no, I mean, that's the beauty of book writing and what you've done with your novels, your memoir and stuff, is putting this down, and people appreciate this stuff, whether it's a current issue or whether it's memorializing, like I mentioned last night, I watched Chinatown, and I watched Chinatown a million times. I don't think I ever watched it from beginning to end. And so I actually watched it from beginning to end, because there's parts that I missed. And wow, just to revisit that story, even though I haven't seen it for a lot of times, but a lot of people just dig into why a story is important and how it works. Does your next book, are you thinking about making a novel? You mentioned it might be about money or finance.
My next book, it is very difficult to write about the current environment, like contemporary America. I think right now, everything is changing so quickly. A book for me takes a few years to write, or 3 or 4 years to write sometimes. And you have the problem of technology, right? So technology that we're using now in 5 years is going to be ridiculous in the book. My first book has telephone booths in it. And, 25-year-olds can be like, what the hell? What? You have a scene in a phone booth? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And it sounds absurd to us, but like, it's not absurd to them. They don't even know what you're talking about. And so that makes something a bit anachronistic right off the bat, because just technology is moving so fast. But like, we're all just engulfed in the world of Trump right now. Is that something people are going to want to revisit 5 years from now? Or are they going to be like, oh God, I don't want to talk about that anymore? Or like a coronavirus or whatever it is, just like, it is very difficult to, like, a lot of writer friends I know are writing dystopian books right now about viruses taking over the world, because the ones that are already out are doing so well because they kind of foretold what's going on. And I'm going to try my hand at, I think, a little bit of literary, or a bit of historical fiction. I'm very interested in a specific robbery that happened in Europe at the end of World War II, where the money went missing. And I want to trace that missing money in fiction, because nobody actually knows in real life where it went. And see how money affects people and what choices people make, for good and bad, when they are faced with financial situations they're not used to. And to me, it's such an interesting part of the world that is probably very difficult to write about in fiction, to make dramatic. But I'd like to give it a go. I always like a really good challenge, and I want to always do something I haven't tried before. And of course, money does make the world go round. And so, yeah, I'm just starting to do a lot of research on that now that I've finished this one. And
there you go. Well, this would be a good escape hatch for people to take and pick up your book, Kings County. We'll give it a plug there, because it can go to a better time that we were, didn't have as much.
Surely we could all use a love story right now.
We could use a love story, and yeah, and part of that's we look at. That's why I love stories, and of course I love the guests on my podcast like yourself, is their experience and what they learn and going through. What are challenging times for them, and a lot of times we come back to that. I've had times where I poured out my soul when people have died around me. When my dogs died was a really hard time for me. I had one dog that was like a year and a half in cancer hospice care, and so I bled out a lot during that journey onto social media. And what was interesting for me was I at first I was like worried about sharing it. I'm like, maybe I'm oversharing this experience, but then I was like, I got to get this out or it's going to fester. And what was interesting to me, how many people came back from my stories and went, that really helped me. That really inspired me. I realized that I hadn't got closure from my dad's death. And just like all this, I don't know what you call it, but this expansion of touching people and moving people. And I think that's what people get from love stories, of crisis stories, of, everyone has that fantasy of, like you say, coming to New York or moving to the big city. And so they always wonder what that journey is. And, a lot of people like me chicken out and don't go for it, but they can read your book and they can live through the fantasy, if you will.
Well, there's always some vicarious living in literature. Absolutely. But
there you go.
It's not always the answer. I mean, there's plenty of, great life in the rest of America as well. But yeah, I mean, that's what definitely this book is about. So.
The times I've gone to New York, I kind of have a perspective because for about 10 years, I really tried hard to be a good photographer. Nothing great, but I really tried to be a photographer. And so when we went to New York or Chicago, what I would do is I'd literally just wander. And I usually like to wander later in the evening when the streets are, I'm not having to deal with people and crap. I don't like people that much. I like people, but I'm not a big crowd dude like New York.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to wander New York at night and see the Empire State Building, take pictures of it, eat at the pizza places, and wander the streets, interact with people. To me, that was just that real sort of gritty sort of fabric. Yeah. And I loved it. In Chicago, when I go to Chicago, a lot of times if I can figure out how to pull it off, they actually have like a car service that will zip you to the airport. Yeah. And they'll pick you up anywhere on any corner. And so what I'll do is I'll have my day bag with me and my cameras, and then I just wander Chicago. Yeah. I don't need to have an agenda. Like I just go. I think the first time I went, I was like, okay, we got a pizza, go to the big park. And my friends are like, you just want us to drop you like in the middle of Chicago somewhere? And I'm like, yeah, just do it. And then I just wander and just pick up the ambiance. And a lot of people don't, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't do that. They don't look up in New York.
It's a place where you can feel comfortable alone. You can eat alone at a bar and not feel like a weirdo. You can walk alone and see groups of people and not be, it's just a place where amongst the millions, like you can also be solitary, and it's really cool in that way.
Yeah. In fact, now I'm hungry for that pizza. That pizza place. I stopped at a bunch of them because I was like, oh, well, I'll try this pizza, because you got to try it all, right?
Yeah, of course.
And you gotta soak up the city, but yeah, and I think it's great that it's captured and stuff like this. So David, we could talk forever, and I'd love to have you back on the show anytime you want to have on. Maybe we should do a little workshop on how to be a writer and how to write books. I don't know if you want.
I'm still learning myself.
But there's the journey, the story of the journey, and that's how we get there. So anything more you need about Kings County, if you want to give it some final plug?
I would just say thank you so much for having me on. Thanks for having like a long form show where a writer can actually discuss the work. So much of the publicity we do is like a tiny 3-sentence thing in People Magazine or Entertainment Weekly, and like nobody ever knows, or somebody holding up your book on Instagram, and nobody ever knows about the book. So it's really, I appreciate the long form.
Thank you.
Format of this. And I would just say, yeah, it's Kings County. This is what it looks like. The
There you go.
Blair
Kings
is
County.
bad.
Pick it up.
Comes out tomorrow, July 28th. And that is the Williamsburg Bridge right on the cover, which plays a large role in the book. There's a bit of a murder mystery at the heart of it, which I don't want to give much away, but it is a book, hopefully, that strikes that balance between a nice character-driven love story and a kind of suspenseful kind of mystery novel as well. And I really hope you enjoy it. My website's davidgoodwillie.com. You can buy it at all the places from there. And yeah, Chris, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I have loved these long-term, these long things. Like I had some author say to me, is it a whole hour? And I'm like, yeah. But the beautiful part is people get to know you. And I think that sells books better too, because people go, who's the guy writing this thing?
Yeah.
And
I always want to know the story behind the book. Like, it's fascinating to me how an author arrives at what they write, and this allows for that. So
yeah, and it's a great time to read books like this, because you can go back to a nice romantic area pre-coronavirus and everything burning down, and you can remember how it used to be. And although what's interesting is that was they were going through their own crises at that time, and that seemed like an existential sort of experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, right now the city's not quite as fun right now as it was back then, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad you guys are doing better than you were. I'm glad you guys are getting there, and hopefully we can get you guys stayed there, because that was quite the experience to watch you guys go through all that.
I also I listened, one of the episodes I listened to recently was your episode back in March when the coronavirus was first hitting. And
wow.
You had this amazing episode where you came on and you were like, I'm not sure what the future is going to be or what the world's going to look like, but buckle your seatbelts and be nice to each other. And it was an amazingly heartfelt episode. It was, I think, only 20 minutes long, but I loved it. And
thank you.
It kind of stands the test of these months very well.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that, because I often wondered about some of those episodes, and I actually had to take some time off because I was lost. But a friend of mine had posted, who's a brilliant close friend of mine, and he said somewhere around that time, he goes, there are two things you do right now: either be a lifter or find a lifter.
Right.
And so I gone through about 48 hours of depression when it really became evident, and I was losing lots of money, just, shows and stuff and everything I do. They're pretty much guaranteed money for me every year. And, 1 week you're just like, well, I guess I don't need that $40,000. So I'll just fuck myself. And
you said this thing about keeping in mind, other parts of the country that, if you live somewhere where it hadn't hit yet, it just doesn't feel like it's a real thing. And it feels like very far away, even though we're all watching the same TV shows and the same TV news. I remember I got corona back in March, and about half the people I knew got it very quickly because it spread in New York like that. And that week or two when Tom Hanks got sick and nobody thought everybody was getting it, but everybody in New York City was getting it. And I remember the rest of the world, the rest of America being like, that's so weird. It's totally unaffected to us now. And now things have flipped. And in New York, life is almost normal. And in the rest of the country, and I know Utah, where you are, there are outbreaks all over the place. Yeah. And it's very easy, even for me who got it, I didn't get it too bad, but I was sick for a couple of weeks, to forget how just in peril and how dire it is. And so I would just add to what you said, always remember that even if it's not on your block or affecting you, it's a lot of other places. And
it's interesting how it got politicized, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah. But and in the callousness of it. But I just got done reading Mary Trump's book. Read it one day.
Also, Simon Schuster book. I would point.
There
out.
You go. The Simon Schuster plug. There you go. The whole interesting thing of that, but for a couple of those episodes, I was really trying to find my voice, where I was trying to find, how do I be a carrier? Because I realize I have a platform and stuff, and trying to carry people, but then you're lost in the whole thing. Maybe there's a book there of what that experience is like, but I was trying to help people, and then I started pulling from my toolbox of 2008, and we still have a lot of ugliness to go through with the economy and everything else that we've done. But and then of course there's this great juxtaposition, or I don't know, maybe you call it a fork in the road, where we have to find out what happens in November, and where this country goes and where the coronavirus goes, actually, I think is dependent upon that. So that will make for some interesting history books, I'm sure.
And it's affecting us all. So hopefully we figure out a way to all come together a little bit.
It has been, maybe you should write a love story about time and the coronavirus or something.
Yeah, I love it on the corona. Yeah.
Tinder and the coronavirus or something.
There's been a lot of breakups that I'm through my friends, but there's also been a few get-togethers and some kids on the way. So it's been a bit of everything.
That's funny. It's funny because one of my friends said one of my friends' wives told me, she goes, "There's going to be a lot of divorces after this." Once we get out of this, and on the other side, there's a lot of people that got really sick of each other being locked in.
I bet, absolutely.
So maybe there's some great stories there. All I know is I really should be going to school to be a divorce attorney right now because there's some business coming. I really wish I had been a divorce attorney back in the day when they legalized gay marriage, because I'm like, wow. They just doubled my business. Awesome sauce, But there's going to be a lot of divorces coming after this, and I don't know, a lot of heartbreak stories or something. I don't know.
A lot of stories to tell, that's for sure. Yeah.
So, what do you think? Do you think we can turn this into a movie?
Well, we'll see. Most of my books have been optioned, and then
there you go.
Made, so we'll see. It's a lot of things have to go right for something to hit the big screen, but they're working on it out there.
There you go. That might be an interesting thing. Kings County, the movie. See it in theaters near you.
I'll come back on and I'll bring an actor with me and we'll talk about it again.
There you go. I'm thinking, I don't know, I guess you'll have to work out who wants to play what part and stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful to have you on. A great discussion. Thanks, Monis, for tuning in. Be sure to check out Kings County by David Goodwillie. And you can take an order up. It'll be available tomorrow. You think you can get it on Audible and all those different formats?
On Audible, it's every platform, ebook, Audible, real hardcover book, everything, anything you want.
I really recommend the hardcover book because you really want to read it slow, because the details that you go into and the experience, and then you're trying to flush out the characters at the beginning. And so I had to slow down reading it because I was like, okay, who are these people and what are they doing? And that gives you a better understanding of how the book plays out as you go through it. So I encourage my audience to check it out. Also, if you're in my audience, you hopefully saw this either on youtube.com/Chris Voss. If not, you can. You can also go to the CVPN, check out all 9 podcasts. You'll also see this episode appearing on Book Author Podcast and Chris Voss Podcast, if you're wondering why I have a different announcement at the show for the beginning of that. And we certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to check it out. We've got lots of great authors that are coming on the show, like David, and we'll look forward to seeing him again as well, hopefully in the future, especially for future books. I think it was all the plugs. That's it, people. Wear a mask, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. I ran out of plugs.